The United States Supreme Court has handed down a massive 6-3 ruling that completely alters the ground rules for federal immigration enforcement and green card holders. In the case Blanche versus Lau, the Supreme Court just cleared the way for Border Patrol officers to more freely deny standard entry to green card holders returning from a trip abroad if they have committed a crime. Writing the majority for the court, Justice Thomas held that the federal law does not require border agents to meet a high evidentiary standard before denying immediate reentry status into the United States. They found that the denial can actually occur simply if a crime has been committed instead of a full current conviction. This ruling has triggered a fierce ideological clash, currently also on the bench, with the liberal wing of the Supreme Court launching a very fierce dissent against the majority, accusing the conservative majority of handing the government a massive blank check to upend the lives of legal residents. Today, we're going to be breaking down this ruling, the two fundamental distinct legal philosophies that divided the Supreme Court, and what this means now going forward. Now, before we jump into what the Supreme Court just did with this ruling, if you like this type of content and you want to make sure you get it going forward, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, and also turn on all notifications to ensure you never miss this information. I also want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is Attorneys on Retainer. When it comes to self-defense protection, in my opinion, AOR is in a league of their own. They're backed by an actual law firm, the Attorneys for Freedom, and they're always expanding upon their benefits to try to give you as much as possible as a member. So if you're interested in that type of coverage, check them out using the links down below in the detail section, also in the pinned comment. And right now, for a limited time, if you use my exclusive code ARMSCHOLAR, you can get $50 off of your individual sign-up fee or $25 off the family sign-up fee. Now, to understand how this reached the Supreme Court, we have to look at the facts that led to this current challenge. The individual here, Mr. Lau, is a Chinese citizen who became a lawful permanent resident back in 2007. Now, in May of 2012, Mr. Lau was charged in the state of New Jersey with trademark counterfeiting for allegedly storing nearly $300,000 worth of counterfeit clothing. Now, while waiting trial, Mr. Lau took a temporary trip back to China. When he flew back into JFK after that trip, essentially I believe that happened in June of 2012, he assumed that he would be able to be processed normally back into the United States. Now, under federal immigration law, green card holders possess a default right to be treated as already admitted into the country. They don't have to reapply for admission every single time they return from this type of short trip. However, there are specific statutory exceptions to that rule. A Border Patrol officer can strip the default status away if a resident has committed certain offenses, including a crime involving moral turpitude. Now, relying solely on the active New Jersey indictment, the Border Patrol officer here declined to formally admit Mr. Lau. Instead, the officer confiscated his permanent green card, gave him temporary paperwork, and paroled him back into the country to face that prosecution. About a year later, Mr. Lau pled guilty to those charges that were brought against him in New Jersey. The government then, in response, used that conviction to launch formal removal proceedings against this individual. Now, because of this, Mr. Lau filed a lawsuit against the federal government, arguing that the Border Patrol officer jumped the gun on this issue. He claimed that at the moment he was standing at the border gate, an indictment wasn't proof that he had actually committed a crime. On first review, an immigration appeals court actually disagreed with Mr. Lau's position and ruled against him. That then led him to file an appeal up to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And on review, the Second Circuit agreed with Mr. Lau and reversed that lower court ruling. The Second Circuit ruled that the officer at the border must possess clear and convincing evidence of a crime before stripping away that resident's status. Now, after the Second Circuit ruling, the U.S. government sought immediate Supreme Court review of this case. And recently, we got a 6-3 ruling from the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court completely vacated that Second Circuit ruling. Now, writing for the majority, Justice Thomas established a clear two-step framework for how the Immigration and Nationality Act actually operates. At step 1, which happens right at the border, the statute only requires the commission of the crime to justify regarding the resident as an applicant for admission. At step 2, the actual conviction or formal admission of guilt is what is required later during the formal removal hearing to prove they are inadmissible. The core of the majority's ruling is that courts have no business reading extra words into the federal statutes that Congress chose to actually leave out. Thomas explicitly points out that The statute uses the word committed, not convicted. As the majority put it in their ruling, a person does not commit a conviction. Therefore, if a border officer has a valid reason to believe a disqualifying offense actually occurred, such as an active criminal indictment, the law allows them to make a quick judgment call on the spot. Furthermore, the majority rejected the idea that the government must prove its case by clear and convincing evidence at the border gate. Thomas noted that while the government does bear a high burden of proof at the final removal hearing, nothing in the text of the statute imposes that heavy burden on the frontline border officers who are tasked with maintaining security and making quick, on-the-spot, rapid decisions in real time. Because Mr. Lau eventually pled guilty, the government fully satisfied its burden of proof at the actual hearing with clear and convincing evidence according to the Supreme Court. Now, predictably, this interpretation faced a sharp criticism and dissent from the court's liberal wing. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was joined by Justice Sotomayor and Kagan. They filed a lengthy dissent focusing heavily on due process and the presumption of innocence. The dissenting judges argue that allowing the government to act first and justify its behavior years later at a hearing, by doing that, the court is completely undermining the statutory security that they believe a green card holder is supposed to be guaranteed. The dissenters point at what they believe is a severe real-world consequence of this type of ruling and this type of action, noting that Mr. Lau was paroled, and after that, his permanent green card was confiscated, and that left him in a state of unstable immigration limbo for over a decade. She argued that that temporary paperwork made it very hard and very difficult for him to secure housing, open bank accounts, and maintain employment, and it does the same for other individuals as well. From the dissent's perspective, they believe that the bedrock American maxim that everyone is innocent until proven guilty should prevent an officer here from stripping a permanent resident of their status based on a mere accusation or an indictment before the court of law has ever actually found them guilty. Ultimately, this case and this ruling here exposes a profound divide on the Supreme Court regarding the separation of powers and statutory boundaries. For the majority of the court, the case is a straightforward matter of enforcing the literal text that was passed by Congress, which gives these officers and officials the flexibility to make necessary spot judgments without judicial interference. However, for the dissenters, in their view, this ruling represents a troubling expansion of executive authority that they believe exposes individuals and goes against their due process rights. So what are your thoughts on the majority opinion that was authored by Justice Thomas and that strict textualist reading on this whole immigration statute? Do you think the court got this right by sticking strictly to the written text? Or do you think that the practical consequences for green card holders are too severe, like the dissenters actually argued? And do you believe that this violates due process? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Now, if you like this type of video and you want to ensure that you get these videos and updates on these types of topics going forward, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and also turn on all notifications to make sure you never miss these videos. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.